Billionaire John Hurley built his humanitarian empire on a lie, his daughter's death. 15 years ago, he abandoned terminally ill Hope in a frozen forest, collecting $5 million in insurance to launch his celebrated charity. But Hope survived. Now, as his trusted chief strategy officer, she controls every aspect of his life, and she spent years engineering the perfect revenge. What John doesn't know is that the ghost he created is about to destroy everything he built. Some debts can't be paid with money. And this daughter refuses to stay buried. The reckoning begins where it all started, in the forest clearing where a father's greed became his daughter's weapon. Before we continue, subscribe to this channel right now and comment below where you're watching from, whether you're in Australia, Canada, the United States, Africa, the UK, or anywhere across Europe. I want to see how far this story of unexpected twist can reach. Because what happens next will make you question who you trust around your own friends and even family. Now, let's dive right in. 15 years melted the snow of that forest clearing into the polished marble of the city. John Hurley stood at the center of the annual Global Philanthropic Summit, a beacon of success and sensitivity. The cameras loved him. His suit was tailored, his silver hair perfectly managed, and his eyes, though calculating, possessed the practiced solemn depth of a man who had truly suffered and overcome. He was being introduced as the architect behind the Hurley Hope Children's Health Initiative, a foundation whose success had leveraged a small insurance payout into a billion-dollar legacy, effectively erasing the one defining failure of his life. He smiled, accepting a standing ovation, every gesture perfectly preserved, perfectly untouchable. His focus, however, was not on the applause, but on a figure standing near the entrance to the VIP lounge, his chief strategy officer, Anya. She was a study in flawless control. Her custom-tailored power suit and sleek, high hairstyle spoke of immense capability, but it was her eyes that held the true measure of her position. They were dark, deep, and utterly unreadable, absorbing every flicker of the stage lights, every shift in the crowd's dynamics, and most importantly, every micro-expression on John's face. Anya was his shadow, his shield, and his most trusted advisor. She managed his schedule, preempted his crises, and commanded his staff with a cold, economical ruthlessness that mirrored his own. John relied on her completely, trusting her because she seemed to have no personal life, no distractions, no weaknesses he could exploit. She was a machine dedicated solely to the preservation of the Hurley Empire. He had hired her 4 years ago, plucked from a pool of anonymous, hyper-efficient graduates, and she had since become irreplaceable. What John couldn't see, as he basked in the warmth of his undeserved public adoration, was that her perfection was a performance born of intense, focused hatred. The flawless efficiency, the icy demeanor, these were the tools forged by Hope, the child he had left to perish. Anya was the ghost in his machine, the terminal illness he thought he had cured, now operating as his closest confidant. She was not admiring the empire. She was mapping its structural integrity, cataloging its secrets, waiting patiently for the precise moment to detonate the entire structure from the inside. She was the one thing he had abandoned, and now she was the only thing standing between him and his carefully constructed fraudulent legacy. Anya, John Hurley's chief strategy officer, stood in his vast, silent corner office, the panoramic view of the city reduced to a distraction. She wasn't looking at the skyline. She was looking at the leather-bound corporate acquisition documents stacked neatly on his mahogany desk. The office smelled of expensive leather and John's specific, sterile cologne. It was the scent of untouchable wealth, the same scent that had clung to the suit jacket of the man who walked away from her years ago. Her hand slipped into her pocket, retrieving the trigger, a small, tarnished gold locket. It was cheap, thin, and the clasp was broken, something a billionaire might buy a child for her 6th birthday and discard from memory immediately. The locket had been pressed into the cold, damp dirt the night he left Hope in the forest, and Elias had found it tangled in the neckline of the red dress. For 15 years, it had been a piece of painful, undeniable evidence, protected and polished only by the friction of her constant revenge plotting. With surgical precision, Anya placed the locket directly on the cover sheet of the crucial corporate restructuring proposal, a document John was obsessed with. She positioned it so the faint reflection of the window light hit the dull metal, ensuring it would be the first thing his eye registered. The metal was cold against the crisp paper. She withdrew, her expression a mask of professional neutrality, the ghost of a cold, satisfied expression crossing her face only after she turned her back to the desk. The trap was set. She knew John would deny it, but he wouldn't forget it. Later that afternoon, John Hurley swept into the office, his focus already burning a hole through the documents. He grabbed the stack of papers, then paused abruptly. His hand froze inches above the locket. The small, dull flash of gold was utterly out of place, an organic anomaly in his perfectly ordered, sterile life. He stared not at the cheap object itself, but at the chilling, unwelcome memory it triggered: a small, crying girl, a red dress, and the impossible knowledge of what that locket represented. A cold wave of unreasoning panic hit him, sharp and brief, like a shock of static electricity. Impossible. Every detail of that night had been meticulously scrubbed. The girl was dead. The police had signed off. He snatched the locket up, his fingers burning with a phantom sense of guilt, and violently tossed it onto a side table, plunging his attention back into the documents. He rationalized it instantly: a cheap piece of jewelry left by a cleaner, a secretary, a bizarre coincidence. But the explanation felt thin, brittle. The silence in the room felt heavier now, charged with unseen menace. He felt a desperate urge to look over his shoulder, to ensure the door was still closed. The locket was gone, but the seed of profound, inexplicable dread was firmly planted deep in the foundation of his perfect world, and it had already begun to sprout paranoia. John Hurley hated the drive. He hated the lack of self-service, the way the road narrowed from 8 lanes of polished concrete to a winding path choked by evergreens, and he despised the inescapable quiet. His usual mode of travel involved a private jet, a high-speed convoy, or a helicopter landing pad on a skyscraper roof. This descent into the isolated state forest felt like punishment. He was irritable, pacing the confines of the luxury SUV's cabin. "Anya, remind me again why we couldn't use the Aspen property? It has every convenience." Anya, sitting opposite him in the back, glanced up from her tablet, her face coolly impassive. "Sir, as I detailed in the pre-briefing, the Aspen site requires regulatory compliance checks following the new environmental mandates. Checks that would compromise the confidentiality of the merger proposal we are discussing. This lodge offers complete, verifiable security isolation for the board review. It was the only viable choice that guaranteed no external leaks." Her logic was flawless, her tone utterly professional, stripping him of any legitimate argument. But logic did little to quell the rising tide of irrational dread he felt as they drove deeper into the woods. The trees were too close, too tall, their shadows too deep. Every mile brought a suffocating familiarity he had spent 15 years burying. He kept seeing glimpses of the world outside his tinted window, the rough, unforgiving texture of bark, the patches of dark, undisturbed earth, all reminding him on a primal level of that cold, horrific night. The unsettling feeling, compounded by the sight of the tarnished locket he had found 2 days prior, had bloomed into a full-blown, superstitious paranoia. He couldn't shake the sense of being watched, of being lured. He felt cold, despite the car's impeccable climate control. "And the staff?" John asked, his voice tight. "Are they vetted? I want absolute discretion." The staff of the retreat are all employees of the lodge's parent company, which is a shell corporation under Hurley Holdings. They have signed triple-tiered NDAs, sir. Absolute discretion is assured. This location is literally off the map, as per your security preference, Anya replied, maintaining the ice-cold distance of an employee providing essential but tedious facts. She was subtly escalating his discomfort. A half-hour later, they crossed a small rickety wooden bridge. "The bridge seems structurally sound, but I have noted it in the risk assessment," Anya commented dryly, not looking up. The structural survey was delayed by the recent weather, but the ground team confirmed its integrity for 2 standard-weight SUVs. John stared out at the bridge, the ancient wood dark and damp. The casual mention of risk and weather was enough. He didn't like risk. He especially didn't like structural uncertainty on a bridge leading to an inescapable location. His anxiety spiked again. Why did she feel the need to bring up the delayed survey? It was a tiny specific detail designed to lodge in his mind. A few minutes later, the dense forest gave way to a brief view of a mountain stream, icy and fast-moving. "That's the Blackwood River, sir," Anya stated, her voice devoid of inflection. "The lodge is just beyond the next rise. The elevation makes cell transmission unreliable, but the encrypted satellite link is stable." The name, Blackwood River, hit him with the force of a physical blow. That was the creek. He had driven past that creek, heart-pounding, 15 years ago, moments after abandoning hope. The memory of the water's distant roar that night, the cold, wet air, it all slammed back. "I don't recall this river being on the itinerary," John snapped, turning to face her, his composure finally breaking. Anya met his gaze, utterly unflustered. "It is a geographical feature, sir. It provides the catchment for the local water source. Nothing more." She offered him a perfectly neutral, professional expression, daring him to challenge her logistics. He looked away first, swallowing his rising panic. He couldn't accuse his chief strategy officer of inducing dread with geographical facts. He was John Hurley, the infallible financial genius. He was being paranoid. The locket, the river, the isolation, it was just stress. But deep in his gut, the seed of dread that Anya had planted with the gold locket was no longer a seed. It was a cold, sharp vine, tangling itself around his heart, pulling him down into the darkness he thought he had escaped forever. He leaned his head against the window, watching the endless green blur, realizing with a chill that he was exactly where Anya wanted him to be. The expensive SUV finally pulled to a stop, not at the expected high-security lodge, but at a barely used pull-off cut into the side of the road. John Hurley, stiff with anxiety and travel fatigue, frowned out the window. The woods here were thicker, darker, and the air was intensely cold, smelling of pine rot and wet leaves. "This isn't the lodge," he stated, his voice tight with suspicion. Anya was already opening her door. "This is a secondary access point, sir. The board requires an immediate private inspection of the proposed timber harvesting site before the presentation. It's a key contractual point. We need to walk in about 200 meters. I've arranged for a drone flyover for the visual data. We just need your sign-off on the ground condition." Her explanation was airtight corporate procedure, built entirely on layers of false documents she had created. John was a man who understood the value of appearing to perform due diligence, especially on controversial timber contracts. "My security team stays with me," he insisted, reaching for the handle. "Of course," Anya said smoothly, already briefing his two bodyguards, enormous men who moved with silent, practiced menace. "However, the path is extremely narrow and the reception is spotty. To ensure the integrity of the encrypted data link on the flyover, it's essential that the executive team moves ahead quickly. You and I, sir, for the initial inspection. Guards, please maintain a perimeter here and monitor the signal." The guards hesitated, glancing at John. He gave a curt nod. The logic, avoiding signal interference and maintaining discretion, was sound, and his absolute trust in Anya's planning was reflexive. Anya led the way, stepping off the asphalt and onto a narrow rocky track that immediately vanished into the dense undergrowth. John followed, the fine leather of his shoes protesting the uneven terrain. The deeper they walked, the more suffocating the environment became. The air thinned, and the only sound was the crunch of their own footsteps and the anxious, shallow sound of John's breath. After perhaps 3 minutes, they stopped. Anya stepped aside, gesturing forward. They were standing at the edge of a small, irregular clearing. It was overgrown, silent, and deeply shaded, ringed by ancient pines. A large, moss-covered boulder sat at one end, and the ground was churned with dead leaves and dark black mud. John Hurley stopped dead. The world tilted. This was it. The exact dimensions. The placement of the boulder. The deep, chilling silence. Every single detail of the place he had spent a decade and a half desperately trying to burn from his memory was standing before him. He remembered the icy air, the way the moonlight filtered through the canopy, and the small desperate sound of hope crying near that very boulder. He gasped, a dry, choked sound. The professional facade shattered, replaced by raw, primitive fear. His skin went clammy, his limbs trembled, and a wave of nausea nearly sent him to his knees. "What is this?" he choked out, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an exit, for his security team, for anything that didn't confirm the impossible truth before him. Anya walked to the center of the clearing and stood there, utterly still, framed by the unforgiving darkness of the trees. Her posture was not that of an executive, it was that of a judge on sacred ground. "The inspection site, sir," she said, her voice now dangerously soft, entirely stripped of professional deference. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. It was the tarnished gold locket. She held it up, letting the faint, weak light reflect off the dull metal. "Do you recognize the ground conditions, John?" she asked, using his first name, a shattering transgression. "Do you remember the day you came here and left this behind?" John Hurley was plunged into the deepest possible panic. His legs shook violently, and he backed away, scrambling clumsily toward the entrance of the clearing. Denial screamed in his mind, fighting the impossible reality. He needed his phone, he needed his guards, he needed the lie of the past 15 years to remain intact. But Anya had already ensured his total exposure. She pulled a small device from her sleeve and pressed a button. A harsh, electronic whine cut the silence, followed by absolute radio deadness. "Don't bother," Anya said, meeting his terrified gaze. "The communications are locked down. The guard's signal is jammed. It's just you and me, John. You and the ground you bought with $5 million. He was completely exposed, trapped in the physical manifestation of his greatest crime, facing the ghost he thought he had buried forever. John Hurley scrambled backward until his back hit the rough bark of a pine, his perfect corporate posture completely gone. His face was gray, slick with cold sweat. His eyes were not seeing his chief strategy officer, they were seeing a nightmare. "Anya," he stammered, fighting for the familiar comfort of the name. "This is insane. What are you doing? This is unacceptable. We need to leave this location immediately, the board review." "The board review is irrelevant," Anya cut in, her voice low, resonant, and entirely new. It lacked the cold, clipped professionalism he relied on. It possessed the brittle strength of 15 years of controlled rage. She took a deliberate step toward him, forcing him to shrink further against the tree. "My name isn't Anya," she said, raising the tarnished gold locket slightly. "My name is Hope." The single word struck him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. Denial flashed across his face, wild and desperate. "That's impossible. You're mistaken. The child, she died. She was ill. The doctors confirmed it." "The doctors confirmed her terminal heart condition," Hope corrected, her voice holding the absolute conviction of truth. "They confirmed the diagnosis you were so eager to hear. But they never confirmed the death. You did that, John. You and your lawyers. You forged the signatures and leveraged the despair." She stepped closer, pointing to the moss-covered boulder near the center of the clearing. "Do you remember the rock, John? I was crawling there. I was in my red dress, and I kept asking you to turn around. My chest was hurting, and I said, 'Daddy, I'm cold. I'll be good, I promise I'll be good.' Do you remember that, John? Do you remember the red dress stained with mud?" The specificity of the details, the innocent plea, the precise location, the red dress, was a psychological grenade. John's denial crumbled into raw, terrified recognition. He clapped his hands over his ears, shaking his head violently. "No. Stop it. You can't know that. That's impossible. I burned everything. You're lying. Who sent you? Did a competitor send you to sabotage the merger? He instinctively reverted to the one language he understood: bribery and corporate warfare. He pushed away from the tree, struggling to regain some semblance of authority. Look, whoever you are, whatever this is, I can fix it, he spat, trying to sound authoritative but succeeding only in sounding pathetic. You want money? 5 million? 10? I will make you wealthy beyond anything you can imagine. We can make this disappear, right now. You walk away, you keep the name Anya, and you never speak of this forest again. Hope's expression remained glacial, utterly immune to the offer. She reached into a small leather portfolio she carried, pulling out a handful of meticulously prepared documents, all sealed in clear archival plastic. This was not emotional torture. This was the presentation of evidence. I don't want your money, John, she said, throwing the stack of documents onto the ground between them. I want the justice your money purchased away from me. She pointed to the top document. That is the original signed $5 million life insurance policy, activated just 3 hours after you left this clearing. Read the beneficiary. She pointed to the second document. That is the initial articles of incorporation for the Hurley Hope Children's Health Initiative, filed 3 months later. The initial capital? Exactly $5 million and 42 cents. My death was your seed fund. Hope then walked past him, a blur of motion, to the SUV's open door. She returned carrying a sealed evidence box, setting it down with a heavy thud. And this, she continued, her voice heavy with scorn, is your greatest masterpiece of fraud, my officially recognized death certificate. Forged, signed by a shell pathologist in Panama who no longer exists, but legally valid enough for the state to close the case. You didn't just abandon me, you legally, officially erased me from the face of the earth to build your humanitarian myth. John stared down at the documents littering the dirty ground, his name, his signature, the proof of his monstrous calculation. The weight of his entire fraudulent, celebrated life pressed down on him. He saw Anya, flawless and cold, standing over him, and beneath her corporate armor, he finally saw the face of Hope, the child he had sentenced to rot, now risen as the executioner of his reputation. His denial dissolved into naked, screaming terror. John Hurley was paralyzed, staring at the evidence documents scattered on the cold forest floor. The mask of the revered billionaire had melted away, leaving only the terrified, desperate face of a man caught in an impossible trap. He tried to speak, but the words were just pathetic, dry scratches in his throat. Hope stood over him, the gold locket clutched in her hand. Her voice was steady, gaining power as she delivered the final accounting of his crimes. You said you did this because of the medical bills, John. You called my life a burden on your empire. But that was a lie, wasn't it? You didn't abandon me to save yourself, you abandoned me to elevate yourself. Every trophy, every humanitarian award, every shining moment of the Hurley Hope Initiative was built on my rotting corpse. She pointed to the trees, encompassing the dark solitude. You sentenced a child to die alone in this cold, dark place. And then you had the audacity to use my name, Hope, as the brand for your philanthropic fraud, using my forged death as the ultimate proof of your grief. You turned my murder into a marketing scheme. Her voice cracked, not with sadness, but with the sheer weight of the moral corruption. John, fueled by adrenaline and terror, finally managed to move. He lunged for the small electronic jammer she had used to cut communications, desperate to reach his guards, to regain control. Hope anticipated the move, stepping sharply aside. You can't buy your way out of this, John. You can't bribe the truth. He whirled on her, his terror morphing into a desperate rage. You little bitch. I paid someone to make sure this whole mess disappeared. I paid him to finish the job. Where is he? Did you kill him too? Did you rise from the grave just to destroy me? Hope stared back, calm and devastating. This was the final blow, the twist he would never recover from. You're right, John. You did pay a man to make sure the job was finished. You paid him to ensure my body was never found, eliminating any chance of an investigation. Her eyes glittered with dark triumph. "But your problem, John, is that you are a financial shark. You have no concept of loyalty or morality outside of a balance sheet. You trusted a man you bought, not a man who was ethical." She gestured toward the dense tree line beyond the clearing. "That man you paid? The man whose name is Elias? He chose to save me. He drove me half-dead to the hospital, risked his life and his meager future to claim me as his own daughter, and spent 15 years raising the ghost you thought you had buried." John froze, the revelation hitting him with the force of an avalanche. Elias. The groundskeeper he'd hired off the books for cleanup. The money he thought bought silence actually bought salvation. The man who rescued Hope was the final witness to his crime. His absolute power, his perfect scheme, had been defeated by a simple act of human decency he couldn't comprehend. The betrayal was not financial, it was existential. He lied, John stammered, the words hollow. "He took the money." "He took the money, yes," Hope interrupted, "and he used it to save his sister, who was dying of cancer. He committed a crime to save a life, twice over. You committed murder to save a tax bracket." Just as the full crushing realization of the twist sank in, the sound of an engine broke through the electronic silence. It wasn't the sound of an SUV. It was the heavy official sound of an unmarked vehicle, rapidly approaching from the access road. "The jammers only worked for so long, John," Hope explained, her gaze never leaving his. "I gave the authorities the complete file, the policies, the death certificate, and the coordinates for this clearing, ensuring they would find you here. They have been monitoring your convoy since you left the city." The vehicle's heavy doors slammed shut just beyond the tree line. Then, 3 figures in dark, professional clothing, clearly federal agents, emerged into the clearing. "John Hurley," the lead agent announced, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and multiple counts of financial corruption tied to the Hurley Hope Initiative. Place your hands on your head." John Hurley didn't move. He stood chest-heaving, trapped between the towering pines, the evidence of his moral depravity at his feet, and the daughter he thought he had murdered standing as the final untouchable witness. His multi-billion-dollar empire had crashed, not by a hostile takeover, but by a quiet 15-year-old secret named Hope. His ruin was complete. The forest clearing was empty again, the silence deeper than before, but the ground was littered with the ghosts of the confrontation, the scattered papers of John Hurley's fraudulent empire, and the faint tire tracks of the unmarked federal vehicles that had taken him away. The arrests, John and several key executives, had been swift, professional, and devastatingly quiet. 3 hours later, the quiet ended. The media firestorm hit with the explosive force of a controlled detonation. Every news channel was running the same banner: "Billionaire fraud, Hurley Hope Initiative founded on murder." The carefully constructed humanitarian myth was shredded in hours, replaced by headlines detailing the conspiracy to commit murder, the insurance fraud, and the systematic use of the charity to launder money and dodge taxes. John Hurley's company was already in chaos. Stock trading was suspended, his assets were frozen, and the legacy he had treasured more than life itself was reduced to a criminal cautionary tale. Anya watched the initial coverage on a tablet in a rental car parked miles away. She felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. The mission was complete. The target was neutralized. She had won. Yet, the victory felt cold, hollow. She looked down at the gold locket clutched in her hand. For 15 years, this pursuit had been her fuel, her purpose, her entire identity. Now that it was over, there was nothing left but the silence. A knock came at the window. Elias stood there, having navigated the back roads to meet her. He looked tired but carried a quiet sense of relief. She opened the door, and he simply wrapped her in a fierce, protective embrace, the first embrace that wasn't calculated or professional in decades. It was the embrace of the man who had traded one burden for another and had never regretted the choice. "It's done, little one," Elias murmured into her hair. She pulled back, the armor of Anya finally slipping. "It's done," she echoed. "But, what now? I don't know who I am without the plan." Elias looked at her, his eyes warm and understanding. "You're Hope. You're the one I saved. You're the one who refused to disappear." He gently took the locket from her hand and tucked it away. The winning wasn't in the destruction of him, Hope. That was just the required cleanup. The winning was right here years ago, when you fought to take your next breath. You won because you survived, and survival means you get to choose what comes next. He took her hand, his calloused thumb rubbing the back of her palm. "He is erased. But you are free to exist. You have all that space now." Hope looked at her hands, the hands that had typed the acquisition proposals, signed the fake documents, and ultimately delivered her father into custody. They were capable hands, but they no longer needed to be weapons. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe without the consuming pressure of vengeance. She felt the weight of Anya lift, the corporate ghost she had worn for so long, leaving behind the core of Hope, damaged but resilient. The final scene unfolded hours later. They were driving Elias's old truck, battered and familiar, deeper into the hills. Not back to the lodge or the city, but toward the secluded cabin. The truck smelled of pine and wood smoke, the scent of her childhood. "What about the money?" Hope asked, looking out at the blurring trees. "It's all tied up in litigation now," Elias said simply. "But we have the cabin. We have the life he tried to take." "No more secrets," Hope murmured, turning her face toward the passenger side window, letting the cool forest air wash over her. Elias glanced at her, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "Only the woods, Hope." As they drove further away from the city's poison glamour and closer to the quiet, rugged solitude of the forest, the cabin appeared through the trees. It wasn't the headquarters of an empire, but it was home, the only place she had ever been truly safe, truly known. Hope, no longer the instrument of revenge, but a free woman, closed her eyes, ready at last to begin her life. The ghost was gone, and the future was silence, sun, and possibility. Hope's story proves that no empire built on lies can stand forever, and that patience paired with purpose becomes the most powerful weapon against betrayal. If this tale of resilience and justice moved you, smash that like button, subscribe for more incredible stories, and drop a comment telling us what you would have done in Hope's position. Share this with friends and family who need to hear that survival is just the beginning. Reclaiming your life is the ultimate victory. Another incredible story is coming next. You don't want to miss it. See you there.